Thank you. I have another person to introduce, another classmate of ours, graduated in 1964. Captain Blaine Moyer, U.S. Marine Corps, served Vietnam, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, the legendary Walking Dead. Blaine Moyer.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you all here today. When Gary Kindig asked me to wear my dress blues for today's event, he kidded me a little bit about whether I was going to be able to get them on. I knew I could push stuff around and stuff it around so I could get inside here, but I wasn't sure how many sets of long johns I could get under them and still get them on. I am an Arizona weenie, and I'm freezing to death here. How about you? Fellow veterans, thank you for attending. If you're a veteran and you're standing, if you're a veteran and you're sitting, please either raise your hand or stand up, please, so we can recognize you. Thank you, all you veterans. Thank you. If you're a Vietnam veteran, could you please raise your hand or stand? Thank you once again. Jim Hill, don't sit down yet. Rick Gable, if you're like Rusty, our United States Marine, would you please stand so we can congratulate you? And I salute you all. I'm so happy to see so many of the Miller family here today. And I understand there's really a large contingent, just not these couple people in the front. If you're part of the Miller family, could you please stand up? Look at that, folks. Awesome. Thank you. I feel that I must remind you, if you look around and see that someone that you feel should be here is missing, of the words of Oliver Wendell Holmes, when he said, "We also know very well that we cannot live in associations with the past alone, and we admit that if we would be worthy of the past, we must find new fields for action or thought and make for ourselves new careers. But nevertheless, the generation that carried on the war has been set apart by its experience, for in our youth our hearts were touched with fire. For some of our friends, Rusty's friends, it's just too hard to be here. Forgive them, for in their youth their hearts were touched with fire." Many of you are here to honor Rusty as the big red-headed kid who grew up in nearby Manchester with that wacky sense of humor. He did all the things that most of us did growing up here, and then a few extras. And ask me about some of those stories later. But there's another Rusty that most of you didn't really get to know or understand. And I think I have a unique perspective about PFC Burt Miller, 0331, a United States Marine Corps machine gunner. He was the guy that carried the Pig, the M60 belt-fed machine gun. If you look at the pictures of him for Vietnam, you can see that he was proud to be a Marine and proud to be the gunner. Ask any grunt how he feels about his gun team. Ask a grunt platoon commander, my job, how he feels. On the move, we kept them back in the column for their protection. But when the sounds of combat exploded around us, the cry of "guns up" was the cry that Rusty responded to. He rushed forward to protect his fellow Marines, and he was very, very good at what he did. He served with L Company, Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division, Fleet Marine Force Pacific. And I really don't think the Miller family will ever know or understand the impact their son's short life had on so many people. I want to tell you today about how Rusty impacted my life as an officer of Marines and as a man with a purpose that God had chosen for him. I grew up, as did my younger brother Bruce, with our hero in our own house. Our dad served as a World War II Marine in the Pacific, so Bruce enlisted in the Marine Corps first, leaving for recruit training at Parris Island, South Carolina, right after graduation from Manchester High School in 1967. I followed that fall, and after a brief enlisted service, attended Officers Candidate School and was commissioned a second lieutenant on Memorial Day weekend, 1968. After several additional months of training, I graduated from the Officers Basic School in November, and just before I was to come home for 30 days leave with orders to the 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam, Bruce called to tell me that we'd lost Rusty in Vietnam, and that the funeral would be soon after I got home. I attended Rusty's funeral, as many of you did, but I remember very little about the actual events. I do remember that I was overwhelmed by Bob and Jean's grief, and I was lost in thought about what this all meant in God's plan for my life. I knew about God's plan for my life. Bob had been one of my Sunday school teachers. He and others told me God had a plan, but none of them told me what the plan was. After all, I was an 0302, a United States Marine Corps infantry officer, and I was going to Vietnam to lead young Marines like Rusty. My decisions were literally going to decide issues of life and death for hundreds of other Rustys. I really wasn't worried about dying or being wounded myself, but I was terrified of the thought that I could be responsible for the grief and sorrow of my Marines' parents and loved ones, like that which I saw in the eyes of Bob and Jean Miller. My fellow graduates from the basic school who were headed for Vietnam as infantry officers, and there were 300 of us that December of 1968, hadn't seen those eyes. It seemed as though Rusty went with me as I arrived in Vietnam on Christmas Eve, 1968, and was immediately assigned as platoon commander, 3rd Platoon Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, the legendary Walking Dead. Early in 1969, I was immersed in combat. I was wounded twice, and then on February 22nd, 1969, on a hilltop on the Vietnamese-Laotian border, a mortar round landed in a group of 4 Marines that I was standing with: Captain George Dink Murdink, Lieutenant Lance O'Toole, Corporal Bruce Robinson, and Corporal John Deddick. I saw them all die around me during the chaos of the next 20 minutes. In the ensuing attack, I also lost one of my own Marines, Lance Corporal Robert Martinez Guerra. Izzy, we called him. I carried Izzy onto the CH-46 medevac chopper myself with visions of Rusty in my mind. He was still alive when I carried him into the hot chopper and gently laid him on the floor. They had told us during our training in Quantico that if we got them on the medevac flight alive, they had a 90-something% chance of living. I was thinking about Rusty and Bob and Jean, and I knew that Izzy had to live. He died en route to the hospital ship, the USS Repose. I had failed. The greatest honor I have had in my life is to have had this great nation trust me with her precious sons to lead them in battle as United States Marines. My job was to complete my mission and bring my Marines home to their Bobs and Jeans, and I'd failed at the most important thing I'd ever attempted to do in my life. I was a failure. I became very angry with God and actually cried out at him for taking my friends and leaving me. But remember now that God had a plan for my life. He spared my life, and I came home and trained young Marines who were soon to go to Vietnam. I was a company commander at the 2nd Infantry Training Regiment at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I worked twice the hours I was required because I wanted my Marines to be the best trained Marines to ever arrive in Vietnam. I was obsessed that not one more Marine would die because I hadn't done my job. No more Bobs and Jeans on my watch. In December of 1970, I left the Marine Corps and moved to Columbus to finish my undergraduate education at The Ohio State University. My friends were all Vietnam veterans, but we never talked about the war. Gary Kindig and I became fast friends again, and we did what is today called hanging together. We never talked about the war. I drank to forget the war, and we scrupulously avoided discussing it. We were stuffing. I moved west, looking, searching for a purpose in my life. I adopted a son and raised him as a single parent. He became my reason to live, but I still couldn't find a purpose for my life. And then in 1989, after a stay at the VA hospital in Tacoma, Washington, I went to Washington, D.C. to the wall. I was determined to find my life. Maybe the wall was the place to start. I had over 100 friends' names to visit, and there were 9 that I traced. 3 of those are on this wall. Bert E. Miller, our Rusty, Joseph Allen Lofton, and Michael P. McCormick. I looked at their names every day, and I still questioned why I'd been spared and so many good men had been lost. I found a number of Vietnam wall sites online and made entries there for and about my fallen friends. I got a call from a lady whose husband had PTSD from his Vietnam service. He couldn't talk on the phone, but he wanted information about our Rusty. I called the mother of all Manchester, Judy Foldery Williams. My date for the 1963 Manchester High School Junior-Senior Prom, and Doc Murphy and the Millers were in touch. We heard of Rusty's great act of selfless courage. Bob and Jean got to hear from Doc Murphy about how the Marines of Lima 3-5 had loved and respected Rusty. I was becoming a connector, helping people to heal from the war. The haze was dissipating. God's purpose for my life loomed in front of me, but I still couldn't really see it. I was getting older and my health was going downhill. I hurt more and could do less to block the pain, so I did what old people are supposed to do, and I moved to Arizona. The internet then brought me Jennifer Murdink, a lady who'd grown up without a father. You see, her dad was that Captain George Dink Murdink, my company commander, who was ground zero for the first mortar round on that hilltop all those years ago in Vietnam. In 2008, the girl without a dad and her brother Jeffrey went to a Walking Dead reunion with me. My Marines were drawn to the Murdinks, and Jennifer said on leaving the reunion, I arrived without a dad and left with 300 dads. The haze was gone. I saw the purpose God had for my life. You'd think it couldn't get any better, but my life is so blessed. One summer I came back to Ohio and I spent time with Bob and Jean. We talked for hours about Rusty, and Bob gave me one of my most prized possessions, a clock that he'd made himself. It has a place of honor in my office at home, which my wife calls my bunker. We also started a Christmas card tradition, and every year I look forward to Jean's chatty letter